Hey dudes and dudettes, it's me, E.H. Ivins, and this is another edition of the Radical Reset. We're going to have some fun today. Okay, so let me begin. I don't want to waste time. I don't want to keep you here longer than you have to be, although it should be a real pleasure and you should enjoy chatting with me. But anyway, let's talk about today, begin with, and there's just so much to talk about every day. I could go on and on. I could spend hours talking to you. But anyway, let's talk about self-cancellation culture. Now, we all know what cancellation culture is. God forbid you say something that's remotely offensive in some way perceived by somebody else, no matter how ridiculous, no matter how well meant, no matter what the context was, no matter what the history is, no matter how much you were kidding. You know, you're not allowed to even remotely refer to things that you don't understand. So anyway, I want to talk about self-cancellation because there's this author, and her name is Alexandra Duncan. And Alexandra Duncan is a well-known, well-published, well-received, well-selling, good-selling author, and she has a new book coming out, or she had a new book coming out, and it's called Ember Days. Now, Ember Days is a novel. I have no idea what it's about, but part of the novel was written from the viewpoint of a gullah. Now, for those of you who don't understand what a gullah is a black person, many of them isolated on the outer islands, the barrier islands of South Carolina and Georgia, that set up their own, and these are free blacks subsequent to the Civil War, that created a subculture within the black community in the Deep South, and they still exist. There are still gullahs. And you can go on YouTube. There are videos about this, and there are past television shows. They're very interesting people. They have wonderful food, wonderful culture, and they're a very interesting group to study. Anyway, but that's not the point of this little diatribe. The point of this diatribe is that Alexandra Duncan, sorry, Ann Duncan. Every show I'm slipping into Bidenism. She had this book, Ember Days. She wrote part of it, as I say, from the viewpoint of a gullah. And since she is white, someone took it upon themselves to tweet about this. She picked up on it. So horrified was she that she picked up on it, that she canceled her own book. She took her novel. It was literally it was already in print. They were about to release it from the publishing house. Publishers Weekly had already run the article. Here comes the new, going to be well-received, anticipated, terrific new novel from Alexandra Duncan, which, by the way, again, I've never read her, but I'm sure writing a novel, I've written a number of novels, and it takes thousands and thousands of hours. If you go into, here comes some blatant self-promotion, but it's just too good an opportunity. I have two novels, The Grand Master and The Terrarium, both on Amazon. Post the links, my producer buddy. Anyway, The Grand Master and The Terrarium both took thousands of hours for me to write. And I'm not saying I'm necessarily in the same league with Alexandra Duncan because I've never read her. I don't know, but I can tell you I know how much work's involved. And to pull your own novel off after work, it would be like killing your own baby. I mean, thousands and thousands of hours of hard work trying to come up with something that people are going to enjoy and read and get something out of and feel edified and feel reaffirmed, whatever it might be, and now she's just throwing it away. Why? Because somebody canceled her. Now, somebody bitched and then she canceled herself. That's the point. She self-canceled. She has become so sensitive that she self-canceled. But wait, that alone wouldn't be the only part of the story, okay? What's really interesting is that, and this is what she said. I want to read her statement before I get into the other part that's interesting. This is a quote. "My own limited worldview as a white person," Ms. Duncan wrote in a statement, "led me to think I could responsibly depict a character from this gullah culture. Clearly, the fact that I did not see the signs of the problem with my book's premise is evidence that I was not the right person to tell this story. I am deeply ashamed to have made a mistake of this magnitude." Now, do you think she meant a word of that bullshit? And if she did, you need to see a therapist, Alexandra. What are you talking about? I was not the right person to tell this story. So let's ask, just to show how absurd this is, should Shakespeare have canceled Othello because he wasn't black? Now look, Alex Haley, for example, in Roots, wrote about white slave owners and how they treated the slaves and so on and so forth. And I guess because it was a pejorative depiction, he was allowed to do that. Now, I'm not criticizing Alex Haley. I'm just saying he was black and those characters were white. So how could he possibly have understood the context of what they were doing and why they were slave owners and what they were, and the nuances? And there were nuances. Again, not apologizing for an evil institution, just saying that in the context of the time, it was a different perception than in the context of our time, which of course it would be ludicrous to assume. But since Alex Haley wasn't white, how could he have written those black? I mean, this is absurd. The black screenwriters of movies, should they not be allowed to write white characters? Should white screenwriters not be allowed to write black characters? I mean, what are we coming to when authors are self-canceling themselves because they're not the color of a character they wrote? But wait, it gets even better. Okay, get this. Publishers Weekly posted an article about Miss Duncan's self-cancellation on his website, but we never could read it. Why? The person named whose critical queries led Ms. Duncan to deep six her own novel, a person of color and the author of young adult fiction, was also criticized on Twitter. So, evidently, being criticized in the world of literary wokeness is the same as being canceled. So, Publishers Weekly felt obliged to kill the article. They said, quote, "We regret the damage the publication of this story has caused this individual, as well as any other instances of violence enacted upon Black, Indigenous, and other people of color." Okay, so the author cancels her own book. The trade magazine cancels the report of the self-cancellation. The trade magazine cancels the article about self-cancellation because the article subjected the source to cancellation. Are you confused? Everybody is self-canceling and otherwise canceling everybody else because God fucking forbid that a word of criticism of anybody has ever written. Shakespeare, withdraw Othello, come out of your grave. Publishers of Othello, cancel it. No one should ever see or read or attend a performance of Othello again because Shakespeare was a white European and Othello was a black Moor. And since Shakespeare was not a black Moor, he should have never been allowed to write Othello. That's so absurd, this entire cancellation of this novel and every other. Guys, in The Grand Master, in my novel, I write black characters, Latino characters, female characters, Asian characters, gay characters. I'm not any of those things. But should I withdraw my novel? Because and by the way, they're all sympathetic portrayals, not that it would matter. Some are actually murderers and everything. But what does that have to do with the price of tea in China? I mean, fuck. Anyway, we're coming to a crazy world. Anne Rice, before I change the subject and go on to my next diatribe, Anne Rice, I want you to withdraw all your vampire novels because you weren't a vampire. And therefore you shouldn't be allowed to write them. I mean, how could you possibly do that? It's offensive to vampires. You're making the entire class of vampires feel absolutely awful about themselves because you dare to write about them when you're not a vampire. And Jonathan Kellerman, one last note, and I'm going to stop right after Jonathan Kellerman. I bring him up because he and his wife Faye Kellerman are two of my favorite novelists. Okay, and Jonathan Kellerman writes the Alex Delaware novels. He's a psychologist who's a forensic psychologist who works with the police. And the policeman he works with, and the reason I bring this up, is Detective Lieutenant Milo Sturgis. And Milo Sturgis is gay. And Jonathan Kellerman is, as I said, married to Faye Kellerman and straight. So he should not be allowed to write gay characters either. You should only be allowed to write gay characters if you're gay. Oh, and by the way, in The Grandmaster, shit, I wrote a gay character too. I'm fucked. In fact, I wrote 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 gay characters in that novel at one point or another, some minor, some major. Come on, man. And I'm the father of 4 children, and not that there's anything wrong with it, to use the Steinfeld thing. There's no such thing as hate speech. There's no such thing as bad. Look, you put it out there, people will either read it or they won't read it. But, if they're going to be offended, just close the fucking book. What is this self-cancellation shit? You don't want to read Othello? Don't read it. You don't want to read my book with gay characters? Don't read it. You don't want to read, but where do I begin? I know it's, you know me, I can go on and on and on, but somehow this just leaves me speechless. And I'll leave that there. What the fuck are we doing to our culture? Okay, let's move along to the the serious pork in this discussion, and I say pork because that's what we're going to discuss, is pork in the political sense. Joe Biden this week, now I'm going to quickly just pivot and change the subject, announced his economic plan, and it's a green economic plan. What a shock. Now, where to begin? Oh, well, okay. So, Joe Biden said this week, and I want to quote accurately. I wrote all this stuff down. I'm looking down because I wrote all this stuff down, and I don't want to get it wrong. It's Mr. Biden's climate speech this week. His most quoted line, the one that all the mainstream media picked up, is this line. Quote, "When Donald Trump thinks about climate change, the only word he can muster is hoax. When I think about climate change, the word I think of is jobs." Now that's a wonderful political line. That is one of those things that says nothing. Okay, it's an aspirational statement. Even if it were true, which I'm about to get into, it's just an aspirational statement. It's not policy, although people will argue with it and assert it as true and belittle the people who follow, for example, what Trump says. But let's get into the accuracy of this. Okay, I don't know what Trump really thinks about climate change. Nobody really does. But here's what he really said in context. This is the full quote. It comes from a 2016 speech, and he ad-libbed the line. And Trump is a big ad-libber, okay? And he ad-libbed the line that was, in my opinion anyway, indisputably accurate, okay? And this is what he said, okay? And he was talking about the climate lobby, not about climate change. The context of this comment, the one that Biden's talking about, and the one that everybody gets into a snit over when they talk about Trump and climate change, when I say everybody on the left, is this quote. Quote, "It's a money-making industry, okay? It's a hoax, a lot of it," close quote. Okay, so all he was saying was the human impact on the climate seems to be overstated by the climate lobby because, there's a lot of grants and money involved in studying climate change. And if you come up with a conclusion other than the climate is changing, like some more well, not even that the climate is, let's all concede the climate is changing. It's the temperature of the planet in the last 100 years has risen 0.9 degrees. There's no doubt about it. It's statistically a fact. The world between 1900 and today, a little over 100 years, has increased in temperature by 0.9 degrees. No doubt about it. The planet is warmed. What is that? It doesn't sound like much, but it does have its impacts. Sea levels do rise. There are impacts. There are, things to deal with. I'm not saying the climate change. I am not a denier. And neither is Donald Trump. All he's saying is the climate lobby is an industry for pork. And it is, okay? So let's go into Biden's proposal just to illustrate how porky this is and how he goes along with it. This is so, and by the way, I'm not the only one who notices this. Even Michael Moore has done a recent documentary film about the climate movement's takeover as handout artists. They go to corporations and they blackmail them with climate change crap. And who's at the front of that line and with their handout taking money? Al Gore. It's in my lock box. Anyway, okay, so he offered no thoughts on climate. This is Biden on climate policy. His speech was a triangulation of hot buttons. So Bill Clinton coined the term triangulation politically, which is basically you look at your enemies and you look at your friends and you look at yourself. Those are the 3 points of the triangle. And then you come up with a policy that undermines your enemies, assuages your friends, and makes you president. It gives you power. That's triangulation. So here's his triangulation. And it was basically, it's just going to be a money machine. So here it is. It calls for carbon capture. Now, carbon capture is one of those things that sounds great. You build a plant, and the plant is basically an artificial tree. Honestly, that's all it is. You build this gigantic artificial tree plant, and it takes the carbon out of the air and replaces it with, hydrogen and oxygen and all the other good shit. And in the meantime, you evidently cool the earth. It works, but there are much better solutions. I mean, we'd have to build a lot of big fucking carbon scrubbers to do this, so we'd have to spend a lot of money. Then they would also keep the oil and gas companies in business, if you think about it logically, because, and by the way, I'm glad they're going to stay in business, but just think about this. He's not talking about, not using fossil fuels. He's saying, let's just clean out of the air the shit they put in after they use the fossil fuels. So he's saying nothing about fracking. He's saying nothing about oil drilling, which is, by the way, his way of fooling his own people. Biden is smart enough to know that we have to have fossil fuels. I'll give him that one. He's smart enough to know it. So he doesn't outright lie and say he's going to do away with the use of fossil fuels. He just comes up with this carbon capture bullshit. He refused to denounce fracking, which I think is a good thing, but he promised to spend $2 trillion over 4 years. This is $2 trillion we don't have, by the way. And that was just turned everybody on the left. And we have to forget the part about the U.S. electricity sector being carbon neutral. His goal is to set, we're going to be carbon neutral by 2035. Now do the math, that would be after he's out of office, which would be about the same as when President Obama, who he worked for and constantly reminds us of, promised us 54.5 miles per gallon on a car after he left office too. What do you figure the odds are of that happening, ladies and germs? Okay, so in other words, politicians love to say that goal was by 2025. So in 5 years, we're supposed to have an average fleet efficiency. In other words, every car made on the average, according to the Obama promise, when he did all of his shit by executive order, was going to be 54.5 miles per gallon average per car, which of course we're not even halfway there. Biden's promising carbon neutrality by 2035. He'll be out of office. He'll be dead, probably. I mean, I know that's cold, but probably, or certainly demented, sitting in a nursing home, drooling, wondering who he once was. Which is sad, by the way. I don't mean to make fun of that. And one of the saddest things I ever heard, just a slight digression, was when Ronald Reagan, when he at the height of his Alzheimer's disease at the end of his life, when he was 90 plus, looked into an aquarium, according to a story told by his family, and looked at a little White House figurine and said to his wife, Nancy, I know that has something to do with me. I just can't remember what. Okay, I mean, it is sad. I'm not here to make fun of people with dementia. Let me make that very, very clear. And at 63 years old, I could find myself demented at any moment. I may be demented for all I know. I mean, do you really know when you're crazy? I don't know. I really don't know. So maybe Biden doesn't realize he's got dementia. I really don't know. But having said that, because I don't know Joe Biden personally, this thing was just fucking stupid. His proposal, which isn't a sign of dementia, it's the sign of pork. It's the same old shit. A vote for Joe is a vote for the same old shit that elected Donald Trump to begin with. It's 2 steps back instead of a step forward. That's what it is. It would spend a shit. And by the way, all you got to do, if you want to control carbon emissions, and I'm by the way not necessarily sold on the idea, but if you wanted to, and an anti-political legislature got together and said, what could we do to control carbon without creating a new government program? Carbon tax. If you impose a carbon tax on emissions, then the private sector will fall all over itself trying to comply with it, because they'll have an incentive to save money. And then the government doesn't have to do shit. The private sector will figure it out because they don't want to pay the carbon tax, and we all win. But of course, that wouldn't spend $2 trillion and create a lot of pork barrel jobs and make everybody, dependent on the government. So God forbid. And there's just no end to it. Let me tell you, again, not changing the subject, in Europe this week, get this. This is Bidenism at work in Europe. Okay, get this shit. In the name of stimulus, this is how politicians lie. The European Union just rolled out a new plank of handouts that lets buyers drive a Renault Zoe. That's evidently a car it's an electric car, by the way. The Renault Zoe, I'm probably saying that wrong, ZOE, but that's the English pronunciation. I think Zoe. Je ne comprends pas. I'm not sure, but let's just call it the Renault Zoe. Anyway, it's an electric car. They're allowing Europeans to drive one off the lot under this new stimulus program for a lease payment of, ready, brace yourself, you're going to be jealous, $0. You can get, in the name of stimulus, you can get a brand new Renault Zoe, drive it off the lot, your electric car in Europe, for $0 down, $0 payment. In other words, they're going to give you a Renault Zoe, and then the government, the European Union, is going to pay Renault for the Zoe, and supposedly that's stimulus, but what it really is a handout, because they have piles of these fucking electric cars piled up that nobody wants. And why does nobody want electric cars? Well, not only do they, by the way, they're not, if you really wanted to save the planet, you wouldn't drive a fucking electric car, because the rare earths that are involved in doing the battery cells, not to mention the recycling of the battery, not to mention the energy it takes to build the car, is greater than building a traditional car. Do your own Googling, check it out. Regular cars are more environmentally friendly when you figure out all of the steps from the beginning to the end through manufacturing and onward than electric cars would be. So anyway, they can't sell them. Plus, I don't know how many of you are car nuts like I am, and I've been shopping for a car lately. Subaru Crosstrek, in case you're curious, is what I settled on in the end, because I like going to the mountains, so on and so forth. But anyway, and I like safe cars, and Subarus are terrific. But having said that, I was looking at J.D. Power ratings. J.D. Power is the independent company that rates everything and how consumers view it. And do you know what car company came in last in customer satisfaction? In other words, there were 30 manufacturers on the list. Okay, number 1 was Porsche. Number two, no, I'm sorry. Number two was Porsche. Number one was, proudly I say this as an American, Dodge. The most satisfied buyers of cars currently, based on J.D. Power surveys and rankings, are Dodge. Dodge cars, the Charger, the Challenger, the that big SUV whose name is now escaping me. Anyway, all of those cars, everyone loves them. Dodge is number one. Who's number 30? But number two is Porsche. Number three is Volkswagen. Number four is Toyota. Then it gets predictable. You know, the foreign manufacturers that you're familiar with. Guess who's at the very bottom of the list? Number 30, and you know I've telegraphed this. It's Tesla. Tesla's cars that burn up, blow up, and Tesla's cars are just sloppily manufactured, and people are having enormous amounts of problems with them. And I've seen breakdowns along the highway here. I see a lot of Teslas because I live next door to Scottsdale, which is a very, no one buys electric cars except the wealthy posing, okay? And the wealthy posers who are buying Teslas are finding them to be a pain in their ass. But anyway, I wonder if we'll have a zero. Frankly, I'd take a Tesla for zero payment, zero down. I'd drive it off the lot. But can you imagine? Anyway. Jesus Christ. But the New York Times, and this is what I just get this is what they said about Biden's plan. Now, I've given you Biden's plan is basically let's throw $2 trillion and piss away the money. And as far as creating jobs, those of you on the left who think, well, this creates jobs, you're forgetting that the money has to come from somewhere, which destroys the jobs. And in every analysis that's ever been done by every credible economist, no one ever considers what would have happened if you left the $2 trillion right where it was, in the hands of the individuals who made it in the first place, and they made it in the first place by employing their capital strategically. So therefore, if you had left the $2 trillion, and let's assume that and we're not going to tax for it, we're going to print it up, which is even worse. But if we taxed it, if we somehow could get it away from the wealthy, quote unquote, and by the way, if the collective wealth of all the billionaires in the United States is $2 trillion, we would wipe them out, which would throw thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people out of work into these green jobs, which no one even knows if the fucking thing is viable. You know, you can't tow a boat with a Prius, guys. I hate to tell you that, but it's true, unless it's a really small boat. But anyway, think about this, and this is the New York Times says, and I'm quoting them too. I keep looking down because I'm doing quotes. I want to be very, very accurate with you guys. The New York Times says of Biden's plan, it connects tackling climate change with the economic recovery from the coronavirus while also addressing racism. Wow, that's impressive. And where do they come up with that shit? Now just imagine for a moment if your surgeon told you that he was going to address racism and the economy while he was doing bypass surgery and he was preparing you for it. Would you not jump up off the table and run the fuck out of the room? Because what does the surgeon know about fucking climate change and racism? And what is he doing even discussing it when he's about to do a bypass? What the fuck is the New York Times talking about? It tackles the coronavirus and addresses racism and the climate. The more you try to do, the more incompetent you're going to be at it. You know, come on, look at your own life. Can you do three things at once? Where's the old saying, you can't have your ass in two saddles and ride them both well? Use your fucking heads. Jesus Christ. It's really funny because a year ago, and again, I'm looking down because I've done the research, Biden actually offered a plan that had an argument. He said the U.S. represents a minor and shrinking share of global emissions and therefore can't fix an alleged climate problem with measures designed to grease domestic constituencies. That's what Biden said. That was the truth. Okay. Notice no mention of this in his latest plan, just a promise to throw money at green jobs that we don't even know if they're fucking real. I mean, I could go on and on and on and on and on and on. Build nuclear power plants. You want to solve climate change? Build nuclear power plants. A fucking blind man could see it. I said it in my last podcast. I'll leave it there. I'll say this. Joe, I'm glad you published something. I'm glad we know what the fuck's going on. But baby, this is what pork looks like. You know, between self-cancellation and pork, you just want to vomit. But anyway, that's where I'm going to leave it this week. This has been a fascinating podcast, hasn't it? I mean, you know, when you really think about it, what should politicians really do? Get the fuck out of the way. Get the fuck out of the way. Stop taxing us. Stop regulating us. Let us in the private sector solve our own problems. That's why, by the way, carbon taxes make sense. You want to help the climate from a governmental point of view. You're in an anti-political legislature. You want to do it, and you don't want to create a bureaucracy. You don't want to spend a lot of money. You impose a carbon tax. Then private, in other words, the more carbon you emit, the more tax you pay for this. You put devices which are they exist. They're proven technology on smokestacks and exhaust pipes and so on and so forth. You measure how much carbon a company emits, and then you impose a tax based on that, which presents an incentive to the company to not emit that much carbon, which then goes out into the venture capital and entrepreneurial community, and they invent cool new ways to scrub the environment and take it out of the air. And the next thing you know, we have cleaner air and no government bureaucracy at all. In fact, we have a little extra government revenue to pay down the fucking massive fucking debt that we've rolled up. So just throw it out there. Give it a thought. Let's be logical. And as far as the cancellation culture goes, back to my original point, stop apologizing for everything that comes out of your mouth. In fact, I'm going to close this podcast by telling my favorite, and this is a measure of political incorrectness. I'm going to tell my favorite Jewish black joke. Now, I know right now there are people, especially my family who's watching this, who are now grabbing the arms of their chair. I'm just going to tell this joke straight up. I'm not going to explain it. I'm not going to explain the Yiddish in it. I'm going to let you take it out of context. I'm going to tell my favorite Jewish black joke. You tell me if you think this is politically incorrect. This is literally a Jewish black joke. No, I'm not going to mitigate it. I'm not going to change any words in it. I've been telling this joke for about 30 years, and every time I tell it, the room erupts in laughter. Here we go. My favorite Jewish black joke. Mr. Cohen turns 90 years old and he wants to have a party. So he goes to a whorehouse and he walks inside and says, I'm going to have a party. And he sees a prostitute he finds attractive and he says, Schwarze, I'm going to have it with you. So the black prostitute gets up, they go back to her room, and she looks at him and she sees he's 90 years old and she better get her money up front, which she does, and they have sex. And it's the greatest sex of her life. She can't believe it. She can't believe how great the sex was with this 90-year-old Jewish guy, Mr. Cohen. She says to him, Mr. Cohen, she says, I can't believe it. This be the best sex of my life. He says, you want to do it again? She says, yeah. He says, well, you know, me being 90 years old and all, I got to take a 20-minute nap. She said, anything you say, Mr. Cohen, anything you say, and while I'm sleeping, you got to hold my schwanz with both your hands. She said, anything you say, Mr. Cohen. So she holds it with both her hands. He takes a 20-minute nap. He gets up again. They have sex. It's better than the first time. She said, oh, Mr. Cohen. She said, I can't believe it. This be the best day of my life. He says, you want to do it again? She said, yeah. He says, same thing. I got to take a 20-minute nap and you got to hold my schwanz with both your hands. She said, anything you say, Mr. Cohen. She holds it with both her hands. He takes another 20-minute nap. He gets up, does it the third time. Now she's exhausted. Oh, Mr. Cohen. She said, I can't believe it. Oh, there's one thing I don't understand. He says, what's that? She said, I understand you being 90 years old and all, you got to take a 20-minute nap, but how come I got to hold your cock with both my hands? He says, well, because the last time I did this with a schwarze, she stole my watch. And I leave it there. Thank you for joining. And by the way, if you cancel me over that joke, fuck you. Thank you very much. This is E.H. Ivins signing off.